Alrighty, YouTube, Niner Empire, what is going down? Welcome back to another video. So I obviously do apologize for this video being uploaded, 2 days from when this news just dropped. I've been super busy with work. Haven't had a chance to come on here and kind of give my 2 cents on this. But the 49ers have officially hired their defensive coordinator, and as expected, from preliminary reports, probably a week ago, about the next defensive coordinator being hired was expected to be within-house, already within the organization. That obviously came to fruition because the 49ers hired defensive passing game coordinator Nick Sorensen as their new defensive coordinator. And former Chargers head coach and Rams defensive coordinator Brandon Staley has also been hired. Now he's going to serve as a kind of like a defensive quality control coach, as well as assistant head coach. So obviously the Niners interviewed Brandon Staley for the DC position, but it looks like maybe within that interview process, a different role was offered for Brandon Staley. And then obviously, the 49ers ultimately decided to go internal with the promotion in hiring Nick Sorensen. So Nick Sorensen, very loved in the locker room. The defense loves him. I'm sure some of the top defensive guys, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, I'm sure some of those guys had something to do with Sorensen being hired as the next defensive coordinator. But, I mean, with what they learned from the Steve Wilks situation, I think philosophical differences between, Steve Wilks and Kyle Shanahan, as well as Steve Wilks and some of the defensive players, prevented him from getting the best out of the defense consistently. I don't think that some of the defensive players kind of bolted well with Steve Wilks, and obviously, with Steve Wilks being hired last year, it was kind of a situation where Kyle Shanahan wanted to think outside the box, kind of wanted to hire somebody that wasn't already within the organization, and it failed. It didn't fail tremendously, but, at the end of the day, it failed. With Kyle hiring Sorensen within house, Kyle's seemingly trying to not make the same mistake. I think, again, there's probably some of the top defensive players that had say in this decision to hire Sorensen. Again, he's very loved in the locker room. The players like him. And it's definitely more of a, it's more so a well-deserved promotion for Nick Sorensen. Now, I'm not going to lie, I didn't expect, if we were a week ago knowing that it was likely going to be a candidate within house to be hired, I really didn't expect it to be Nick Sorensen. I thought, Chris Kosirak could have been an option, Daniel Bullocks, Johnny Holland, one of those guys that work with a skill position. Obviously, Daniel Bullocks, secondary coach. Holland was the linebackers coach, and then Kosirak is the well-known defensive lineman coach. But none of those guys were hired. I don't know if Kyle interviewed every single one of those guys. I know a couple days ago reports came out that the Niners actually tried to hire Jeff Ulbrich from the New York Jets to serve as their new defensive coordinator, and while both parties had interest, Ulbrich ultimately decided to stick around in New York, and he could potentially be a guy that the Niners look at next year to fill in for Nick Sorensen if Sorensen doesn't do too well as a defensive coordinator. But to be completely honest, I think Nick Sorensen's a great hire. I think you have to hire somebody that the players love, and Nick Sorensen is one of those guys. Again, he's very respected in the locker room. The players like him, and that's what you want in a defensive coordinator coming in. So again, I like the hire. I think it's a great hire. I think he's gonna do well. It was interesting along with Jeff Ulbrich, that the Niners were trying to hire from the New York Jets, Steve Spagnuolo, the Chiefs defensive coordinator, Kyle Shanahan reached out to him kind of just out of respect to try to lure him away from Kansas City to come serve as the defensive coordinator in San Francisco. Obviously, his attempt, kind of failed, but Kyle said out of respect that he wanted to reach out to Spagnuolo and kind of see what his thoughts were with leaving Kansas City to come to San Francisco and ultimately serve as the same role that he's doing in Kansas City. So so again, along with Sorensen, they hired Brandon Staley as assistant head coach / defensive quality control. Now, this is the Brandon Staley move reminds me a lot of what the Niners did last year with hiring Anthony Lynn as an assistant head coach. Kind of just like Kyle's right hand man. I think Brandon Staley's also kind of going to be looking over Nick Sorensen's shoulder and kind of helping him with the defense and whatnot. So didn't really want Staley to be hired, I'm not going to lie. I'm glad that Staley wasn't, hired as the defensive coordinator. And it doesn't hurt for a guy like Brandon Staley to come in and maybe, give out some other ideas for this Niners defense and whatnot. With Brandon Staley, I just don't think he's a leader of men. And again, I'm not mad whatsoever that they hired him, to the position that they hired him as, but I'm glad also that, he wasn't hired as the defensive coordinator. So, again, it seems like Staley's kind of going to be watching over, Sorensen's shoulder, kind of helping him out here and there and whatnot, kind of just given, he's probably going to be giving Sorensen ideas and kind of somewhat advice. Again, a lot of people forget that Brandon Staley actually had the Rams defense just a few years ago at number one across the board. So he's a very good defensive-minded head coach. He just struggled in L.A. with the Chargers. He just wasn't that team. You could tell that team didn't like him. He didn't have the locker room together. Things crumbled for Brandon Staley. Just because he didn't work out as a head coach doesn't mean that he can't work out with another organization in a different role. So don't mind the Brandon Staley hire. It almost seems like the Niners they hired Nick Sorensen, but just in case they hired Brandon Staley if something goes terribly wrong with Nick Sorensen. So again, I don't think it will. I think Sorensen's going to be just fine. I think he's going to do fine. Obviously, we'll see how that kind of works out. But along with those hires, the Niners hired former Seahawks linebacker KJ Wright as their assistant linebackers coach. So it seems like KJ Wright obviously just retired a few seasons ago. I want to say he retired maybe 2 years ago with the Seahawks. No, it looks like he retired 3 years ago because his last stint was with the Raiders in 2021 before he ultimately retired. But I love this hire. He's a Pro Bowl linebacker. He was that linebacker aside from Bobby Wagner that dominated in the early 2010s and whatnot. So love that hire. I think he's going to do great. Obviously, KJ Wright he understands the linebacker position as anybody else would, as any other former linebacker would that's been in the league I believe he played 10 or 11 seasons total in the league. So he's going to bring a lot of knowledge for Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw and Flanagan Fowles and Oren Burks and all these guys. So I think love this hire. I think he's gonna be great as a head coach. Obviously, we'll see how that kind of bodes well for him, or how that kind of bodes for him. But it almost seems as if a small Pete Carroll tree is forming in San Francisco. It's actually pretty interesting that some of Pete Carroll's former assistant coaches that he was around during his time with the Seahawks. Some of those guys are on the 49ers, so it almost seems, like I said, as if there is kind of a small Pete Carroll tree forming in San Francisco. So love the KJ Wright hire. I like the Nick Sorensen hire. Don't have any problem with any of those hires. Even the Brandon Staley hire, I probably would have had a problem had he been hired as the defensive coordinator. But again, it's assistant head coach / defensive quality control for Brandon Staley, so I can't be mad at that. But yeah, obviously, let me know what you guys think of these hires in the comment section down below. Give me your guys' 2 cents on it. Did the Niners get this defensive coordinator hire right? Should they have went in another direction? Let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, as always, go Niners. I'll see you guys in the next one.